Welcome to Everything is Everything. With the open sky above our head and the green grass beneath our bare feet, any endeavor we embark upon can never lead to defeat. And today, in fact, we are embarking upon an endeavor by popular demand. In an earlier episode, Ajay Shah, you promised us all that if there is enough demand for it, you will do an episode on Unix, one of the great passions of your life and the driving force of much of your creativity. And well, here we are. So there was enough, this tells you. We read the comments. So please keep commenting, telling us what you'd like to see. We read the comments, we act according to your desires. And here we are, Unix. So Ajay, are you all set for this Unix episode? Have you done your screencast and your recordings and everything?
Yeah, I'm ready with the screencast. And for the rest, the main story I kind of know well. So I'm happy to get this opportunity to talk about it.
Let's go with it. And I want to start by sort of setting the stage for you to do your thing, since it's an episode really focused on Unix. But I like zooming up and giving perspective. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the place where Unix was born, which is Bell Labs. Now, Bill Gates was once asked that if he could enter a time machine and go at any time in the world to any place in the world, where would he go? And he said, I would go December 1947 to Bell Labs. That's where I would be. What happened in December 1947? The transistor was created, the first great semiconductor device, and at the heart of all of technological progress since then. And Bell Labs was a remarkable place where there has been so much scientific creation and innovation and so on and so forth. I mean, this was 1947 when the transistor was created. The Unix story begins in the late 60s. But by the 60s, Bell Labs, which was an R&D laboratory of AT&T, employed more than 15,000 people with more than 1,200 PhDs. So it was like an absolute hub of the finest minds coming together, working together. And there's a very interesting structural reason for this. Now, we hate monopolies, both you and I. We love competitive marketplaces. But AT&T was a sort of a natural monopoly in the sense that they were in telephony, and the entry barrier for telephony was incredibly high. You had to sort of end to end, you had to provide telephony, you had to do wiring all across the country, build telephone exchanges, do all of that. So it was kind of like a natural monopoly. And in return for that, the government also made some deals with them, which included that you have to provide access to places where access doesn't go, etc., etc. But the result of that was that for a long period of time, there was really no competition. So they were kind of guaranteed a revenue stream. And they could put some of that revenue in things which would, which didn't have to cater to the short-term horizon of the next quarter. They could do long-term research, long-term R&D. So they set up Bell Labs just for this initial idea that we need to understand this technology better, new products for our own use, better switching, etc., etc., and then build science and technology for the future. Now, a lot of people sort of overstate these numbers. Actually, if you think about it, Bell Labs spent about 2.8% of its revenues, if I remember correctly, on R&D. AT&T rather spent 2.8% of its revenues on R&D, and of that, 0.3% was basic research, the kind of basic research we celebrate today, from which semiconductors came and from which Unix came, and a small chunk of that was there. But what is particularly important is that, and particularly different from a lot of corporate structures, is that a lot of that research could have a really long time horizon. It need not be about, oh, we got to get a product out in January, this is a feature we need, build this feature. It was, no, this is a broad field we are in, many things are possible, design the future. And that was kind of the sense that it was. And one particular phrase that I like in this regard is also, it comes from a quote by Arthur C. Clarke, where he once said that, at first sight, when one comes across this in a surprisingly rural setting, the Bell Telephone Laboratories main New Jersey site looks like a large and up-to-date factory, which in a sense it is. But it is a factory for ideas. And so its production lines are invisible. And there's a great book, first recommendation of today, called The Idea Factory by John Gertner. He picked up, the name The Idea Factory from this great Arthur C. Clarke quote. And it was a factory for ideas playing the long game. And that's why, that's how so many great ideas came out of there, which in a sense are the foundation of the modern world.
And I find it very inspiring to think that at Murray Hill, which was the essence of Bell Labs, which is more the R and less the D, at Murray Hill, there were about 3,000 employees, out of whom there were about 1,000 PhDs. And you know what? This is not an expenditure point that is very inaccessible to many, many organizations in the world today. Okay, even in India, we can think of many private people who have the ability to put down this kind of money on a 20-year horizon. So it's not the magic of resourcing. It is some other magic. It's a magic of culture, it's a magic of management, and there is a lot for all of us to learn by understanding the culture, the management, the people, and why this thing worked so well. Because there were many, many other collections of scientists and engineers and technologists and thinkers everywhere in the world. And there was just a bunch of accidents which brought some people together to Bell Labs. So I never want to say they were better. I want to say there was something about the place, there was something about that culture, there was something about the management mechanisms that created conditions where these 3,000 people were unusually effective and unusually creative. So I feel we should try to understand that world, and half of the Unix story is a story of culture and philosophy.
And I want to sort of broaden the sweep out a little bit because, like you correctly said, that a lot of things that were right happened at Bell Labs. There was a resourcing which is not at crazy scales, as you pointed out, and there was also the sense of your incentives are long term, built for the future. It's not immediate, but a Bell Labs in some other part of the world may not really have succeeded. There was something about that time, the 50s and the 60s, American counterculture, actually just being there in America, which contributed to that. Tell me a bit about that.
So it is easy to create a more Stalinist organization where there is top-down control and power going down. I think that there was something about that moment in history after the Second World War, the boundless optimism in the United States and the flowering of human freedom that was taking place, which created conditions where people were more eclectic and more eccentric, and there was less of an acceptance of top-down authority. Neither did the top try to oppress the others in the organization, nor did the organization accept too much top-down authority. So that created conditions for the human mind to flower. And later in the story of Unix, we will go to UC Berkeley and Bill Joy and Silicon Valley. And in many ways, it's the same story. It is the counterculture, the hippie culture, the flowering of the human possibilities, which came with a new level of freedom and the willingness to question traditional social, cultural, and authoritarian mores, which created conditions for people to do great things.
And what I really like about what happened at Bell Labs is that it was not just a place for dreamers. Like there's this beautiful phrase I picked up either from Gertner's book or Brian Kernighan's great history of Unix, which we'll also link from the show notes and is a must read, which is that it was a place for eccentrics but not dreamers. And, not dreamers in the, the pejorative sense of the term. In the sense that everything that was made with a purpose. Ideas had to become things. You couldn't just build castles in the air. You could take a long-term perspective, but there was a purpose to it. And that impresses me. And the other thing that impresses me, which I think is super important, is, we've done an episode about how the great minds tend to cluster together and multiply each other and all of that. And we link that from the show notes as well. And it seems to me that there was something happening here. Like in Kernighan's great memoir, he talks about how one day, he's just settled into this new office. And when, random guy comes to him and says, hey, I'm Dick, let's go for lunch. So he goes for lunch, and then later on, he realizes that this gentleman who just, calls himself Dick, hey, I'm Dick, let's go for lunch. He's the great Richard Hamming, whose textbook Kernighan has learned from, and so on and so forth. And across the hall from him later on down the line, there are all the great, other great figures, Thompson, Ritchie, all of those guys. And there is a striking thing that Kernighan says, which is geography is destiny. And that really strikes me. And, there's a these days there's a lot of fashion for work from home and all of that is one of those sort of mantras people keep using. And I remember this great tweet from Shane Parrish a year ago go, to the effect of, those who show up at work in the office will end up being the bosses of those who show up at work at home. Something to that effect will reproduce a screen. And the idea isn't that, oh, you have to follow bureaucratic procedure and do the performative thing and go to office. The idea is you need to interact with real people. To me, where the real work happens, the real creativity happens, is in the water cooler conversations. It's in the beer after the office work. All of that. Like you and I shoot in person, right? About half our episodes, gentle readers, have actually happened because on the fly we've been talking about something and we're like, is pe episode karte hai. And we will also, of course, plan out certain episodes well in advance and send each other notes. But some of our most fun episodes, like 7 stories that should be films, for example, or the great math episode that we did, they all came on the fly because we're taking energy from each other. And so I find that that's an incredible part. And another aspect that Kernighan writes about is that there was no one boss who could determine your career. It was collegial. You're interacting with everyone. There are no departmental limits. The hierarchies are sort of vague and all over the place and almost self-determined in a sense by who you respect, etc., etc. And that just works so beautifully.
Gentle reader, this boy is not a Bengali dreamer. Look at the number of books he has read for this one episode. Okay, get off your butt and read some books.
Okay, I am Bengali in the sense that I would urge my gentle readers, don't get off your butt. It's a very comfortable place. God gave you a butt for a reason, right? Actually, God gave you a butt for 2 reasons, both of which we are sort of indulging in. So, when reading about Unix, you kind of realize how much came out of Bell Labs in the sense that Unix powers so much that we use. If you have an iPhone or if you use Google, Facebook, Amazon, any of those, at its heart, at its core, there is Unix. Equally in Bell Labs, in fact, the programming language C++ was created around that time. And Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all the modern browsers are kind of based on that. So it is the foundation of everything. It is all around us. It is almost like the air we breathe. But I want to take you to a more fundamental question, which is like, what is a programming language? What is an operating system? What is Unix? Assume that I know nothing of this technology. I'm just a dumb user, and explain all of this.
Okay. So at heart, inside every computer, inside every cell phone, inside every smartwatch, bracket, I have a dumb watch, inside every modern device, there is a thing that is called a CPU. Okay, CPU stands for a central processing unit. What is there in a CPU is the ability to process one instruction at a time. Okay, so hiding inside the CPU is a capability to read a computer program. And what is a computer program? It is one painful, tiny, detailed instruction after another. So it's an instruction like add 1 to this number. Okay, then check if this number is more than 42. If so, perform this action. If not, perform that action. Okay, that capability is hiding inside a CPU. So a computer is a circuit board on which there is a CPU and there is some memory. Now, so far all we have is the hardware. You can write computer programs in a language which is directly understood by the CPU. Okay, and that is called assembly language. There is an English-like narration of how assembly language is written, and then there is a program that is called an assembler, which converts that English-looking assembly language into the bits and bytes that go sit on the CPU and run there. Okay, you can do that. So that is the most bare metal way of writing computer programs. And for all practical purposes, writing assembly language is impossible for most humans. Okay, there was a bad world in which the first computers were created, where the only thing you could do was write an assembly language. And that was horrendously difficult. So if you go back to the very first computers around Johnny von Neumann and the ENIAC computer and the early IBM computers, they were programmed only in assembly language. And this was ridiculously hard. So we will put up a screen with an example of assembly code, and you can't understand anything. It's very hard to write. You have to concentrate at ridiculous levels. You need to be a super person in order to do that. So right from the start, the chase was on that can we find a better language that fits the human mind? Okay, that's called a programming language. A programming language fits the human mind It is completely unambiguous. So it's unlike human language, which is full of context and nuance, and we each of us read a sentence differently. That's not permissible. A computer programming language is an explicit, precise statement of what has to be done, but it is designed for the human mind to be able to read and write. And then there has to be a translation of the programming language into the assembly, because at the bare metal they'll only understand assembly. Okay? This translation is done using a very specialized computer program that is called a compiler. So a compiler converts the raw text of your programming language into an assembly language which can go into the CPU. Okay, so this is the basics of what is a programming language. And right from the beginning, in 1952, John Backus invented Fortran and Lisp got created. And ever since, there has been the journey of finding newer and newer programming languages that better fit the human mind and are convertible into the assembly language at very high levels of efficiency, so that you don't want to waste computer power down at the CPU. And then that brings us to the operating system. Okay, so right in the beginning, computers were done in the following fashion: that the CPU was given over exclusively to one program at a time. So you would submit a program for a run. That program would be on a deck of cards. There were physical decks of cards. They would be like this. Gentle reader, I'm old enough that I've actually worked with punch cards. So there'd be a deck of cards which is copied into the computer's memory. The computer runs that and then it stops. Then it is ready to take the next deck of cards. That's how the computer worked. At a time, it did only one thing. Okay, then early on at MIT, they invented something called the CTSS, which was sort of the first operating system, where the idea was that there are no more decks of cards. You get a screen, I get a screen, hundreds of people get a separate screen, and they start typing commands in the screen, but they're all sharing the same underlying computer. It's a time sharing system where each of us is given the illusion that we have a computer to ourselves. But the computer is very fast. We are very slow. We type slowly. So little slices of the computer's mind are given to each of the screens. Okay, now you get to the problem of a program that is called the operating system, which sits at the computer, and which is this supervisor, which is this manager of the resources of the computer. So the computer has some CPU, it has some memory, it has some disk, and this has to be shared amongst all the users. It has to be shared in a way that is fair to all the users. It has to be shared in a way that no user can collide with another user. I should not be able to do bad things to you, and I should not be able to do bad things that bring down the system. Okay, and all of us have to be given access to the powers and the capabilities and the resources of the system, while having fairness on resource allocation and preventing us from damaging each other or bringing down the system. So this specialized program is called the operating system. So you and I may think that I am interacting with a browser or I am interacting with an editor. That is what we see. But for that editor to run, for that editor to access resources, for that editor to behave in a safe way, all these things are being orchestrated behind the scenes by something that is called the operating system. There is an older term which I actually find descriptive, which is supervisor. So think of it as the supervisor who's there all the time. The operating system is always there behind the scenes, watching over the shop, watching over all the processes that are running and applying rules to all of them, then receiving requests for resources and access to all kinds of machine capabilities by all of them, sometimes saying, no, I can't do this, or taking back the result to that process. So all the things that users do are processes, they all hang off an operating system. So the operating system is the mother, it's the core of what lies inside every computer.
So yeah, that's a sort of a wonderful primer of what computer languages are and what an operating system is. Give me a sense of the history of how operating systems kind of evolved and how we eventually arrive at Unix.
So I've already talked about two very special programs. I said that a compiler is a program that translates a high-level programming language into assembly code. And I said that an operating system is the supervisor that manages many, many people and many, many processes. These two are amongst the most complex programs that humans can write. They are great pinnacles of human accomplishment. So we start at the MIT CTSS, and it was a great success and everybody loved it. And in the 60s at MIT, a project was invented which was called Multics, which was the idea to push CTSS further and turn this into a bigger, better operating system. And this was a partnership between MIT and Bell Labs and I think General Electric, which was supposed to build the computers, or I don't recall whether it was IBM. Multics was this big dream. It was a monstrous system. And by the way, we have a phrase for this which comes from the Bell Labs community. It suffered from a second system problem. So what happens is you build your first system, CTSS, and you become very proud and confident, and you know 40 things that are wrong in CTSS. So you set out to build a second system where you will plug in all those 40 barriers. But the combination of arrogance, because you won on your first system, and overreach, that you're trying to now add 40 things into it, these two things damage the second system. So the second system is often a shitty one. The first one will be spare and elegant and minimalistic, and it will have a design coherence. The first system will often be written in lonely isolation by a bunch of mavericks. By the time the first system wins and becomes famous, now all kinds of power seekers want to clamor onto the project. And it is hard to say no to the less thoughtful feature requests from many powerful people. So second systems suffer from a changed power structure, from an excessive list of feature requests, and the loss of humility by many of the individuals in the first system. When they were doing the first system, they were more human, they were frail, they were terrified, they were quaking in their boots. When the amount of boot quaking declined, hubris sets in. So Multics was a giant failure. Okay, so MIT and Bell Labs and one-third partner, which I think was General Electric, spent a lot of money and time and resources on trying to build Multics, and basically it never worked. I mean, it kind of got commercial at some point, and I think it died out finally by 1980, but basically it didn't work and it was not a great success. And one young genius from Bell Labs called Ken Thompson had been deputed by Bell Labs to work on Multics. So he was part of the project. He witnessed the failure of that project, and the project was shut down, and so then he was back in Bell Labs. In the Kanihan book that you mentioned, there's a little origin story around Ken Thompson. Okay, so Ken Thompson was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. This would be in the late 50s, early 60s, okay, the greatest years of what it meant to be in Berkeley. And he was this mad undergrad who would show up at 12 midnight and work on the computer till 8 a.m. because that was the only way to get a computer all to himself. And he is quoted as saying, that was my personal computer, because the entire university would go away, and from 12 midnight to 8 a.m. the entire computer would be there exclusively for him. And he was very good at working with computers and imagining things to do. And so he was in UC Berkeley, and then one of his professors asked him, are you going to attend graduate school? Which is American for postgraduate education. And Ken Thompson said no, because he thought he was not good enough. He thought he was just a regular guy. And just note the wonder of those years. Without telling him, that professor filled up his application for attending a master's or a PhD, I forget which, and forged his signature and submitted the application form, and the guy was accepted. And just think of that world. Think of the world where students and professors were comfortable and flexible, and the concept of admission into graduate school was not something horrendously regimented. Okay, so as an aside, I have a similar story about my father. Okay, so my father restarted education very late in his life, and he attended night school to do an undergraduate degree, and then did a master's in economics at the Bombay University. And in some ways he was one of the cool people in that world, but he did not get good marks in the master's examination. And he was sunk in gloom because he felt that that meant that he would never get to do a PhD. And D.T. Lakrawala and P.R. Brahmanand and M.L. Dantwala and the other elders of the Bombay University department talked about it with each other. They knew him as a person because he was their student. They knew that his marks were not so good. And they reached out to him and they said, we're taking you into the PhD anyway. Okay, so there was that sense of being able to make decisions not in a numerical, what is the cutoff, how many marks did you get, but rather going in a more sensible way without rigid rules. And I think these are important things all of us should be thinking more about, because in India today everything is regimented and turned into black and white rules, and we are opposed to all forms of discretion. And I think that somewhere in that we have lost the essence, because actually we should always look at the person and not at mechanical procedure. So that's how Ken Thompson ended up in graduate school. Then his fame spread, and some people in Bell Labs tried to reach out to him and say that, come work at Bell Labs. And he said, no, I'll never work for a corporation. Okay, so he was clear that I am a researcher, I'm a thinker, and companies are no good, and I'm not going to work for a company ever. And I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I'm not going to work for a company. So they hounded him and they said, come meet us, do a talk, and then you can decide. So in those days, these were very expensive things. They flew him over to the West Coast. They flew him over to the East Coast, and he stepped into Bell Labs. And he says later, I walked in that corridor and I saw all the names on the doors, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to be near these people? So again, it's that the clustering, the network effects that worked, that Ken Thompson took interest. And so he did a talk, and then he had rented a car, and he left that place. And then there's some mind-blowing story that he first went to a friend's house, and then he went to a motel, and then he went back. Okay, and the folks at Bell Labs got a printed offer to that friend's home while he was there. Okay, and he wasn't sure, he hadn't made up his mind. Then he left that home and he went to the motel. And there they got back to him and they said, what have you done? And have you accepted? And he said, how did you find me? Okay, and all that you knew was that I was at a motel in New Jersey. And they said, we're the telephone company. We found the phone number of every motel in New Jersey, and we made all the calls and we found you. He said, very well, I accept. And that's how he joined Bell Labs. So Ken Thompson had come out of the Multics project and he was figuring out what to do. And Bell Labs management had been burned by spending a lot of money on Multics. And they said, we don't want to do operating systems research. Okay, so for a long time, Bell Labs management had decided that we will hire all kinds of crazy people, but we're not going to fund all your projects. I mean, funding will be a little more tough to find. So you can fool around and do crazy things on your own time, but getting serious resourcing for an operating system, no, we're not going there. Now at that time, there was an obsolete computer, which was called a PDP-7. Okay, note, in that age, in the mid-60s, this was an obsolete computer. So it was lying on some corner and nobody wanted it. Okay, so Ken Thompson sort of grabbed access to that computer. And it also had a disk, and it had a weird disk. The disk was too fast for the computer. But these were just like the junk parts lying around in Bell Labs. And Ken Thompson grabbed these things and put them together. Okay, so in every office, I think there is a suitable supply of rubbish that nobody is using. And I think this story runs contrary to any declutter manifesto, that you do want to keep your PDP-7s because, as you're going to see, they can amount to something. So on that PDP-7, Ken Thompson got to work writing a space travel game. So what was the funnest thing to do with a PDP-7? He wrote a space travel game where you could fly a spacecraft and land on Jupiter, and of course you had to get the calculations correct, otherwise your craft would go wrong.
Give me some perspective. What would have been the memory, the RAM, etc., of a computer which was obsolete then?
16 kilobytes.
16 KB.
Yeah. So you have to do everything in 16 kilobytes. Okay, or 32 kilobytes, some such number.
Jesus Christ.
Definitely not 64 kbytes.
Yeah.
So less than 64 kbytes. Okay, so this was an ancient machine and he was just fooling around. He wrote a space travel game. Kanahan writes that I played that game and I enjoyed it. Many other people enjoyed playing the game. They said, so nice. Okay, so that was the beginning of trying to do something with that PDP-7. And he was fooling around and he was fooling around. And there comes a day where Ken Thompson understood that, I am 3 weeks away from an operating system. Okay, so what had happened was he was fighting with that disk, and the disk was faster than the computer. And so he wrote a pretty general disk scheduling algorithm and a file system, and a whole bunch of things had been done. He had an application, the space travel game. He had a file system. He had a device driver to control a disk, a pretty sophisticated device driver that could even deal with a disk that was faster than the computer. And then he suddenly had this clear idea that I'm 3 weeks away from a complete operating system, from a very simple stripped down operating system. And it just so happened that his wife and child were going to California to visit his parents. And so he had 3 weeks all to himself. And he planned it as 1 week to write an editor, 1 week to write an assembler, 1 week to write the operating system kernel. In 3 weeks, I'll be done. And it actually worked out like that. He did that one marathon sprint, and it was exactly 1 week for an editor, 1 week for an assembler, 1 week for a kernel, put the whole thing together, boom, Unix had booted. And there was an internal conversation, what should the name be? And of course, it was deeply inspired by the failed Multics experience, but it was very bare, it was very stripped down. And so they chose the name Unix. So sort of conveying something not Multics, but actually it was there. So that's where it began, but management didn't know and management didn't want it. So then with this in hand, they went back to management and said, hey, we've written a small operating system. Now give us money and we will make it better and bigger. And management said, no, we're not going anywhere near operating systems. Yeah, because you guys wasted tons of money on that Multics project. No OS research here. OS is operating system. So there was a long interregnum, and then there were some other useless machines that were used, and some progress was made, and then they hit the brainwave. The brainwave was that there was a patent department inside Bell Labs. Okay, so at that time, Bell Labs was at a run rate of about 1 patent a day. So they were prolific in pushing out a lot of patent applications, and patent applications needed a certain strict formatting, and they needed diagrams, and they needed mathematical equations. And so the management was about to put up a chunk of money for a commercial vendor who would give a specialized system that only knew how to do typesetting of patents and produce output on a phototypesetter, and that would be submitted to the US Patent Office. And they said, look, you give us that sum of money, we will build an internal piece of patent software. So it was equality, that what you are about to pay to an external vendor, for that kind of money, we will build an entire text processing, document processing system. And what they knew in their mind was they were actually going to write an operating system. So for the money that management was about to pay somebody for a specialized piece of patent processing software, they were going to write an entire typesetting system, a document processing system, and run it on Unix and build Unix out on some modern hardware. They knew that internally. They knew that was the kind of firepower that they had, and management approved it. So that's how the next wave of Unix development happened, and they built the world's first typesetting software, which was first called ROF, and then NROF, and then TROF. And these are like very powerful abstract tools for writing marked up text. So if you've heard HTML, hypertext markup language, the word markup originates here, where inside the text are embedded commands for italics and boldface and section number and all that. And that raw text is given to a typesetting software which drives the typesetter, and you get the beautifully typeset patent application. So all these things were built there, and that's how Unix happened. The next piece is the story of C. By this time, Unix was starting to go into multiple machines, and in these years, all the operating systems had been written in assembly language. So you needed crazy people like Ken Thompson to write an entire operating system in assembly language. And the great man Dennis Ritchie started working with Ken and saying that, could we write this in a high-level programming language? None of the high-level programming languages of the age were good enough to write an operating system. So Dennis and others got together and built a brand new programming language, and that is C. So the most important programming language in the world today is C. And C was written to make it possible to write Unix in C. And then there was a ridiculous moment where Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie rewrote the entire Unix in C. And there are these great feats again and again in this story. And then it suddenly became portable. So it was able to go to more and more machines. I want to claim some credit for the economists here that I think that there was significant pressure on AT&T at the time from the antitrust authorities. And that impeded the ability of AT&T to turn this into a product. Okay, so at this point, Unix was so cool and so powerful and so successful. It could have readily turned into AT&T launching computers and operating system, and they would have become the bloody monopoly because they were streets ahead of everybody else. I have an opinion that they dropped this ball because they were absorbed in their battles with the US FTC, and launching a computer and an operating system would have appeared too close to the telecom business, and it would have appeared like an extension of their monopoly power. And so they kind of let this thing be. It didn't readily fit their business strategy, and it kept growing. And then they licensed it to other universities, so it spread to other universities. And then they started giving source code licenses, so the full C source code started spreading to universities all over the world. There's a famous book which was written where there is a printout of the Unix kernel source code, and there is a volume 2 which is a line by line explanation of what it's doing. So this went to universities all over the world where people could then read how an operating system is written. And so their lingua franca was Unix, because Unix was the operating system that they studied. And most importantly, it went to UC Berkeley, where there was a great man called Bill Joy, who connected it up into the developments happening in the world of computer networking. And so Unix became the vehicle of TCP/IP and the internet. And that was another little explosion. And the modern internet is the product of that. Then it went into the computer industry. There was Sun Microsystems, and many commercial companies built various kinds of Unix machines in it. And the last huge milestone was Linux, where a young man in Finland wrote a free clone of Unix, which is called Linux, and he released it into the internet as open source software. I think it was 1991 that he wrote a post on Net News. He was a young student saying, I've been fooling around with the code of Minix, and I have written a brand new operating system. What do you guys think? What should it do? And right after that, there was an extremely mean and critical response by a great computer scientist called Andy Tannenbaum. And little notes from my personal history. I remember after I read Andy Tannenbaum's article, I thought he's not being fair. And I was an older person compared to Linus. So I wrote email to Linus saying, you should not be disheartened. What you're doing is very important. Wow. So like I was there, right there in August 1991 when these developments were happening. I was reading and writing these things. And I booted Linux when it reached version 0.1. And apart from some 7-8 years with Mac OS X, Linux has been my only system since 1991. So today Unix has just triumphed completely. It is everywhere. Okay, as you said correctly, you may think you're using Amazon, but on the servers behind Amazon is running on Unix. The Kindle runs Unix. The Mac OS X was Next OS, that was BSD Unix chosen by Steve Jobs when he was in Next. And then when he came back to Apple, he brought the entire Next team back to Apple, and that is Mac OS X. And that same capability is there inside the phone and tablet that Apple makes. I remember at that time, a big turning point was when they wanted to develop iTunes. And it was written in roughly a week on the Unix environment of what was coming together inside Apple. And that was the day Steve Jobs truly understood. Till that time, he was going on the wisdom of other people, that really there is only one great operating system in the world, and that is BSD Unix. Many of the people he trusted the most had always said to him that the path to operating system is BSD Unix. When iTunes got done in a week, Steve Jobs is said to have got religion. He understood that there is something magical going on here, and you couldn't have done this anywhere else. And it is the perfection of Unix that makes these things possible. So today, Unix is everywhere. There is a list that is called top500.org, which is the 500 most powerful computers in the world. Most of them are Unix. Maybe there are 1 or 2 or 5 that are not Unix, but 490 or more are running some variant of Unix today. So as I said, it's your Android phone, it's your iOS phone, it's your Kindle, it's your iPad, it is all the Linux computers. It is essentially everything happening in the server world. It's everything happening in the cloud world. Everything is Unix. Many routers run Unix. I encourage you to buy one of the routers that will run an open source version of Unix, because then you can be tinkering with the software that runs on your router. Okay, I encourage everybody to buy one of the Raspberry Pi machines and play with them. They run Unix and so on. So essentially there is one holdout, that is Microsoft. So there are some amount of Windows machines in this world. They're a declining share of the world. Apart from that, everything is Unix. So there is really no other operating system other than Unix today. And now I want to say this in a engineering wins way. It is a tribute to the superiority of the design, that design scaled and scaled and scaled and scaled to completely unexpected applications. So you started out with some 64K and 128K tiny primitive machines, but the design metaphors and the design principles and the values and that philosophy is working today with mind-bogglingly powerful machines and very different machines. Today's phone is not a simple machine. It has a multi-core CPU which will have some performance cores and some efficiency cores. It'll have a GPU on it. It might have, I hate the jargon, one of these AI chips. I hate these words. It will have all the specialized stuff sitting on the computer. Or consider those top 500 list of the most powerful computers in the world. Consider individual blade processors sitting in modern cloud computing facilities where millions of CPUs are being put together, again under Unix systems. So there is like a super operating system controlling millions of CPUs in a cloud computing center. It is a testimony to the beauty and greatness of that design that we are standing here in 2023. And the principles and visions of the early 70s and mid 70s are still the dominant paradigm today. There are grumblers and haters who will say that today Unix is holding us back. And I have no doubt that you have to reinvent and you have to find the next generation. Okay, so I think Ken Thompson says that somewhere in this world, in some lab, there is a little used and defunct Cray 1 supercomputer. And there will be a next Ken Thompson who will write a space travel game on that. And out of that will come the next revolution in computing. I have no doubt that will come. But it's a tribute to this space where there has been so much interest, so much research, so much money. And still, it is these ideas and principles that have won. So if you want to be practical, like, look, this stuff won. If you want to be aesthetic, then there's actually something beautiful going on here.
You know, in our last episode, we used this phrase dancing with chains. And to me, that's like a central motif of everything you just described, which is not just a triumph of engineering or a triumph of science. It's a triumph of creativity in the human mind. You know, you start with Ken Thompson, a young man trying to, write a space computer game on this little dinky machine. And there's a practical problem. The disk is going faster than it should. And he writes something for that. And he's dancing with chains and dancing with chains. And then Unix comes out of that. And then they don't have the budget for it, but they take a budget from somewhere else and they have to build a typesetting system, which they do, but they also use it for this. And everywhere, I think creative people, whether they are artists or writers or programmers or engineers, are dancing with chains. And that's, I think, just shows you the power of the human mind and perhaps the importance of chains.
I want to address all of us in India. Okay, I think too often we feel that there is some rarefied world inside IBM TJ Watson labs where everything is good. Okay, where all problems have been solved, there is no politics, there are no resource constraints, you have great colleagues, and that is why those great people are able to build great things. And because I am sitting in India here in some dinky organization facing infinite constraints, I can't do cool things. And I just want to say that these chains are in your mind. And we need to wake up and we need to do things differently.
Or we can dance anyway. Even if these chains are there, we can dance anywhere.
There's plenty to do, and you can be cool and you can be creative. Okay, remember we talked about C.R. Rao in an earlier episode. It's like there was no right to win. Okay, so I want to use a business phrase. There was no right to win. You're C.R. Rao. You're an obscure graduate student sitting at ISI in Calcutta in an age before email. Okay, it's like, how are you going to be at the frontier of the statistical thinking going on in Cambridge? Okay, and the answer is they did it. So I feel that these chains are there. We should recognize them. We should try to find ways to ease those constraints. But we should never lose sight of the curiosity and the passion. And actually, great things can be done by each of us. That, sitting inside a concentration camp, you can write poetry. So we should be always pushing on the greatness of what we do, rather than, whining about our chains, or, raging against our chains.
We should always keep dancing. So I have a question here, which has to, like, one of the colorful descriptions of Multics and why it failed is that Multics was trying to climb many trees at the same time, right? A description I love. And one of the qualities that mathematicians and programmers and so on value is elegance. In fact, Kernighan wrote an early book on how to do programming, which was modeled on the elements of style by Strunk and White. And his thing was the same values which you take to writing good prose, which is simplicity, elegance, you make it easy to understand, not a word out of place. You need those values in programming as well. So my question to you is kind of twofold here. One is that what is the value of internalizing this particular sort of quality as, part of your set of personal values? And number two, how much is this dictated by the scarcity of time and equipment that you would actually get? Because you describe Ken Thompson, okay, he's got those 8 hours at night and he's staying up all night, and he can't afford to be wasteful in that time in any of the programming that he does. So how much of it is born out of circumstance?
His computer is ridiculously weak. His computer is mind-blowingly underpowered by modern standards.
So elegance is not just like today we think of elegance as a virtue, but did it begin as a necessity?
Look, we have a selection bias. We remember the winners. We write histories about these great stories. There were countless other messy, ugly ways of doing computer science, which went away by the wayside. And that's how today we understand the value of philosophy. Okay, so we should come back to philosophy at depth. And I want to say to you, gentle reader, that if you think the words culture and philosophy sit in a different shelf from the words engineering or science, then, I would like to question that. And at the heart of the Unix story is the deep connection between the pinnacles of engineering and some very warm and soft words around culture and philosophy. For example, the tight link between the elements of style by Strunk and White and the elements of programming style by Kernighan and Plogger. Okay, so there is actually a deep connection between these worlds of thinking. Similarly, people have often noticed how there was a deep impetus that came to Steve Jobs from the aesthetics of typesetting. That the visual design of fonts was a powerful driver for him in the early years. And there was a direct connection between that artistic and aesthetic view and Steve Jobs as somebody who played a giant role in modern computers. Okay, so the answer is yes, that the words culture and philosophy and science and engineering and mathematics are actually one of a piece. And one of the elements of difficulty in the Indian doctor-engineer world is the separation of those two cultures, where the engineering types have lost this sense of what it means to do good engineering. And hiding in the story of Unix are some very important elements that we should stay connected to, because that's what actually keeps us vital and keeps us from being just one more ant in the procession, but doing something great with our lives.
A really quick mid-episode recommendation book called The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, where you get to learn that everything that is beautiful is also beautifully functional. Otherwise, it is not beautiful, and that applies exactly to engineering as well. So tell me a little bit more about, like, when I hear Unix lovers talk of Unix, they're not just talking of the tech, they're talking of the philosophy.
So, now I want to go to the question, why did this happen? Okay, why did Unix work? Was it just an accident? And I think that there are many, many important lessons that we can take from this story, from this supreme success. Okay, so if you are a cold optimizer of your own life and career and merely wish to make mega bucks, you should care that the most valuable industry of this world today is equal to everything running Unix other than one holdout, that is some Microsoft Windows computers. Everything else is running Unix. So then you should be asking, hey, how did that happen? Or if you think more deeply about philosophy and culture, you should be asking, what is that DNA? What is the philosophy and the culture that worked so well? So here are some ingredients that are on my mind. I want to just ramble about them in no particular order. Okay, so first is that aesthetic sense of simplicity, that systems that are designed around a few simple components and throw away a lot of features and capability work better because the human mind can comprehend them. The great computer scientist David Gerlunter has a great line. He says that when faced with complexity, our only defense is beauty. So there is an aesthetic sense of beauty which is important, and we need to be in touch with that aesthetic sense, because only when things are simple and beautiful. So I want to use the idea that simplicity and beauty is the user interface of the human mind. I don't know why that is so. Humans are not robots. We are created by billions of years of evolution, and the abstractions that work for us are simple, elegant abstractions.
This reminds me of a quote by the aforementioned Dick Hamming, where he said, "The purpose of computing is insight, not numbers."
Yes. Dick Hamming also has a great fact which is in that Bell Labs book. He was the first person to see it. He predicted back in the early 60s that you may think that Bell Labs does science and engineering, but more than half of it is going to be computation. And of course, he was absolutely right. As every sad graduate student in every field in the world now knows, you land up at grad school and all you do is programming. You may think you're doing biology, you may think you're doing political science. Ghum firke, it's just programming. So that is the way the computer
The universe runs through algorithms.
Yeah,
so
the universe
that's
is
fine.
basically one big algorithm. Back to principles. So one principle is an aesthetic sense of beauty and simplicity. A second principle is to build tools and components and push the rest of the world aside, focus on one tool and one component at a time, and make that tool good. So build one small tool at a time with limited functionality, but then make it bulletproof, make it well written, well tested, make it highly performative, that is capable of catering to very high levels of performance. When given the correct level of resources, it can do almost anything. So write good algorithms, do extreme amounts of unit testing, but have a simple coherent tool that does one thing at a time. And then create the mechanisms and the infrastructure for many, many tools to be able to work with each other. Okay, so make it easy for humans to combine tools. Don't ask humans to build a big, giant, complex system. Rather, go bottom up and build component, component, component. And then the humans will put them together like Lego blocks. And then we will get a big, complex system. So I feel this is a very important design philosophy. Too often, we get managers and conventional corporate computing doing the so-called top-down design, where you start that we need this kind of enterprise IT system, and then inside this we'll require this, inside this we'll require this, and we're going to do one big giant project, and we'll throw thousands of man-years at this. And that's really not an effective way to go. I want to tell my story about how I do this, and I have had many conversations with some of the great geeks and hackers, and I think there's a similar story there. I find that I think about a problem for a long time and don't write any code. It's just there. It's there on my mind and I'm kind of processing it, that I have filled my mind with the problem. I use the phrase, I've uploaded the problem in my brain. I make no promises on when I will give you an answer. And I know that when my mind is thinking about it, something is happening. And then in a large problem, I have that way of isolating that this is a difficult component, this is a difficult component, this is a difficult component. So I isolate 1, 2, 3 difficult pieces out of that. And then I just throw away everything else and I focus on one. So I take one small problem, one small component. There'll be one function that's hard and I'll grind away at it. I'll think about the algorithms for it. I'll write it nicely. I'll test it nicely. And the greatest thing I do there is focus. That then I'm not thinking about everything else. I've got tunnel vision and I'm maniacally doing 1 or 2 or 3 critical components and just write them. Get them right. And be proud and be happy that I've done these things properly. Okay. Then zoom out and say, okay guys, here we are, we're going to do this large thing, but I've got this in the pocket, I've got this in the pocket, I've got this in the pocket. And then suddenly a whole bunch of possibilities open up. Oh, this is so nice, we can connect this to this. Now we'll build this one translator that will convert this to this. And suddenly a whole system design blossoms. So it's good to do one small component at a time. It's good to find the hardest things and solve them. and get them done. So I want to tell a story from the Aadhaar project. Nandan Nilekani, Sanjay Jain, others were grappling with the problem of authentication, where there are like 1.4 billion people in the database, and Amit Varma presents himself and tries to make a fake ID. And the system has to be able to look at that and match it with one of the existing IDs. Or Amit Varma tries to go use the ID somewhere and say, give me PDS rations. And the system has to find that one in a billion. And it also needs to do deduplication, that if by mistake a second one has crept in, then you need to find that these two records are identical. And at the time, they connected to the biggest computer companies of the world and said, here's the algorithm that is required, and it has to run for 1.5 billion people. Okay? So first, please note, they chose a tough piece of the giant UIDI problem. They didn't say, I'm doing the full thing. They understood the full thing. But inside that, they knew this was going to be a hotspot. And they got presentations back from some of the top research groups of the world. And Nandan Nilekani has the cred and the respect that people will try hard to do cool things that are valued by him. And they had presentations from top research groups saying, what you describe can't be done. Okay, and they turned around and they wrote it themselves and they did it. Okay, so they focused on a difficult problem. They first tried to say to somebody else, you do this, and that somebody else said, you can't do it. And then they said, okay, fine, very well, we will try. And then they internally solved those problems. They put the tools and technologies together to achieve those things. And then suddenly you are on confident ground, because you know the difficult pieces are done. Then it's a more normal project execution problem. So I feel this is a good trick. And this is a Unix way of thinking of work one component at a time, keep components simple, make them good, test them to death, make them high performance, document them well. Okay, and which brings me to the next element of the Unix philosophy. There is a deep connection between thinking, programming, and writing. Writing code is like writing prose. They are not different. Okay, if you, gentle reader, think that you're writing code all day, what you need is to write more text all day. Okay, writing is the heart of thinking, and writing English and writing code and thinking and arguing, these are all one of a piece. And that Unix community in Bell Labs pioneered a brevity and clarity of writing that was just new. Meaning before that there had been big ugly corporate things done by the likes of IBM and Digital Equipment Corporation, or you know, if any of us have been victims of documentation of many other computer companies that I shall not name. The people in Bell Labs invented a whole language, a style of talking, a terse, precise way of writing things called man pages, books. They wrote many, many books. They took books seriously. It's a lab that wrote a lot of books because they weren't content to merely imagine the ideas. They wrote about ideas, about principles, about philosophy. So it was that full package of an amazingly good computer system backed by very good documentation that got people to use it, but then going further into the documentation about the principles and the philosophy. And that's really is the virus of the idea that spread to many, many people. And so the system never died. So even though the momentum of Unix development moved out of Bell Labs by the 80s, it went to UC Berkeley, it went to Sun Microsystems, it went to Netscape, it went to Google, it went to the Linux community, which is all over the world. The principles of philosophy remained. And you know, I'm an example of a person that has never visited Bell Labs, but I have been influenced by these books and these writings. So I think they took writing seriously, and they invented a whole argot of a beautiful, sharp, precise way of writing, of communicating. Their books are slim, but they're extremely well written, and they had their internal culture of writing well. And again, they each of them talk about how each other improved their writing. They selflessly gave of their own time on helping others with book projects, of reviewing the book project drafts of others, of putting enormous time on improving other people's books and projects. And I have found this very inspiring, and I feel, you know, that's what all of us should do for each other, that help people along on building their books, because none of us are big enough to write our own books. So, you know, I mean, like, I have a book co-authored with Kelkar where it looks like Kelkar and I did it. Actually, hundreds of people did it. We fed off an entire community which created ideas, helped us with ideas, argued with us, told us that we are wrong, read drafts of the book, like fundamental improvements of the table of contents came from others, and so on. So I have just very low level of self-esteem when it comes to my role in these things. And I think that's how human beings are. And again, I learned a lot by watching that Bell Labs community, watching them talk to each other, watching them work with each other, watching them help each other, watching them improve each other's writing. And the way they demanded writing, they didn't say, oh, I'm a scientist, so I will not do writing. No, these are all like PhD maths people who valued the writing and understood the importance of principles and ideas and philosophy.
I have a question for you. I often, when I teach my writing course, talk about the link between clear writing and clear thinking, where it's not just a one-way connection. That, of course, if you're a clear thinker, you're more likely to be a clear writer. It goes both ways. If you force yourself to write clearly, you are forcing yourself to think clearly. You are teaching yourself to think better. Deirdre McCloskey once said that, writing is a part of research. You don't start writing after the research is done. Writing is a part of that research. Joan Didion once said, I don't know what I think till I write it down. So I want to extend that to programming and say that then does becoming a better programmer make you a better thinker?
Yes. Good thinkers make better programmers, good programmers become better thinkers, but it's got to be done right. Okay, so there is a coding grunt that is visible all too often where they've actually not applied their mind. They're doing it as a job, or they're doing it in frenzies of Red Bull nights of programming, and they're not deep thinkers. And all of us have to graduate to something bigger. There is a deep connection between the writing and the programming, and I want to say this in two different ways in addition to what I've already said. One is that I've seen many times in history that the man page drives the program, okay, because the demands of writing a good man page force you to think clearly about what is being written. And in fact, people read the man page and turn around and criticize, no, this doesn't make sense. Whereas if you'd only written a program and you'd written some bad documentation around it, then it would have elicited less criticism. Whereas a good man page suddenly brings the program into sharp relief, and it encourages sophisticated thinking about what is that program and what else it can do, what it should do and what it should not do. The place to attack a program and throw out features is when its man page starts looking crafty. Okay, so writing a good man page is integral to writing a good program. I want to jump ahead to Stanford many years later, the great man Donald E. Knuth, who we've mentioned before on this show. He has passionately written about this concept that we should write computer programs as if we are explaining the algorithm to a person sitting beside me. That is a good computer program. It's not written for the computer to understand. It's written for a human to understand. And only then do we get high quality, well-written, extensible code that will stand the test of time. If we write some dirty thing that the computer will use and run today, the point is in 1 year it will be gone, because the world will change. The demands on the program, either in capabilities, functions, performance, platforms, context, will all change, and nobody will understand that old bad code that was written. People will throw it away and they'll start over. So the syndrome of bad programming is you just starting over and over and over, and like we tear down the house and we start over, we tear down the house and we start over. One of the reasons the Unix community has won is because we are now tending a garden with 50-year-old trees. Okay, we have massive mature edifices of code and data, and we keep on improving them. We are building cathedrals. We are not in this stupid game of building a house and burning it down and building a house and burning it down, which characterizes so much of the modern computer programming world. But rather, we should build high quality code, and the language of the code should be written in a way that is conducive to explaining it. And Knuth carried it to a next level. I mentioned the word markup languages. Okay, Knuth had a concept of weave, which is the warp and weft of text and code. Okay, so he wrote his programs as an English essay where he breaks into code, and then an English essay where he breaks into code. And he wrote the automated tools whereby the tool splits this into two files. One is a pure English and the other is the pure code. And the pure code goes to a compiler and becomes some of the most important programs of the 20th century. And the pure English goes to a typesetter and becomes the great books of Donald E. Knuth.
Wow.
Okay, this is the level at which Knuth played, and I share the dream. That is the level at which we should think. And this takes work, this takes effort. And for that, we've got to understand play for 50 years. Don't play for 50 days, don't play for 50 weeks, play for 50 years. These things take years, they take enormous amounts of devotion. Ayush has always emphasized to me that a word that I don't use enough is devotion. It's not just intensity, it's not just a sprint, it's a marathon. And it has to come out from deep inside, where we are willing to do these things for a long, long time, because we dream of getting this beauty done. It is an artistic quest to make beauty and to translate some ideas into living embodiments in this world. So that's something that worked very well, which is the integration between the writing and the world of Bell Labs. Then we already talked a bit about the word power and the extent to which there was control. There was a lot of a self-organizing system in Bell Labs. If you say 3,000 researchers, bracket 1,000 PhDs, there are probably hundreds of such labs all over the world. There are such in India. There are such in Soviet Russia. There are such in China. Okay, there are lots of corporations that have the easy ability to put down this kind of money. But the magic lay in the management, because all too often, when you get these kind of organizations, you get people at senior levels who are drunk with power, who crave power, who like to kick people around, who like to tell people what to do, who like to control people. And the essence of what worked in Bell Labs was a more federated culture that, we'll get people in, and then, we'll do some projects, we will be useful, we'll keep on delivering good things to Bell Labs. I seem to remember a story where the president of Bell Labs brought a visitor, and there was a demo going on where Bell Labs was being shown to some important person, some powerful person. And Ken Thompson showed a project he was working on, which is he was writing a game of chess. He was writing a computer program that played chess. And that powerful person said, yeah, this is cute, but how is it useful? And, why are you wasting your time writing a program that played chess? Okay. Now, you may know that there is a dynamic programming algorithm for the chess endgame, where in the endgame, you make a list of all possible mate situations and you work backwards for what are all the moves that take you there. Okay, Ken Thompson had invented that dynamic programming solution for the chess endgame.
I think these are known as stable bases, where for 7 pieces or less, it's basically solved. Ken Thompson
That is a Ken Thompson
wow.
dynamic programming algorithm.
Wow.
Okay, so dynamic programming is a great idea that was built by Richard Bellman and Robert Calaba in Rand Corporation. Bracket, Robert Calaba is a teacher of mine, and I never got to meet Richard Bellman, but my PhD thesis, which was about women in Malaysia, was deeply a dynamic programming idea. And Ken Thompson took that idea from the 60s, and in the 70s, he brought this into chess and playing that endgame. And as you said correctly, today chess endgames are a completely solved problem, because that algorithm works so well that in any endgame, you'll get it perfect. The president of Bell Labs answered to the visitor that, he was building a chess program, but along that way, there were some nice algorithms got developed, and it turns out to help in scheduling phone calls in the Bell system. So the president of Bell Labs understood those connections, and the president of Bell Labs was defending the fun and games of Ken Thompson to a visitor outside. So first is, it's such a great story about how building a space travel game and a chess program is actually a good use of the human mind. And the second, that this was understood by the management. The management tried to create flexible, unpredictable, self-organizing structures where there was a lot of give. That we won't prevent you from writing an operating system, we're just not going to fund it. Okay, that kind of thing, where there was a lot of space for people to imagine and create. And similarly, I've talked about Bill Joy and BSD Unix and the connections to the cultural revolutions of that period. And I think that there was really something going right in all that. A next piece of philosophy and culture that I want to talk about was that almost effortlessly, without noticing it, the people in Bell Labs took the culture of science and mathematics in not keeping trade secrets, but rather opening up the entire code. It was just the most natural thing to do. Like if I prove a theorem, I'm going to show you the proof. I'm not going to hide the proof. In similar fashion, if I write a computer program, I'm going to give you the code. Okay, it's the natural evolution of the old ideas of writing, publishing, sharing that were always there in the world of science and mathematics. That we don't hide the implementations, and then we all build on each other's work. You find mistakes in my proof, I find mistakes in your code. That's how it goes on. Today it has a fancy name. It's the open source movement. But actually it's just a continuation of a story that began 500 years ago, that Newton didn't expect us to believe all the things that he said. He gave us proofs, he gave us demonstrations, and those were published. They went out to other people. Okay, so while patenting gives a 17-year head start, it also gives away all the details of your design to other people who will then read your design and start improving it. It's a very interesting balance where on one hand I get protection, on the other hand my ideas go out, they get published and they go to other people. So this is how Bell Labs worked. The Unix tapes went out to other people. So Unix spread to universities all over the world. It helped that the management in AT&T was dithering between the idea that shall we commercialize it? Will the US FTC come after us if we try to commercialize it? And so they chose a compromise. We'll send it to universities with a special academic license that you can read the code and you can tinker with the code, but you can't commercialize it. But by that time, the knowledge went everywhere and people understood how this thing worked. And that is really the foundations of the open source world. So by the way, in the mid 70s, in the late 70s, I forget the date, I seem to think it's 1976 or 75 or something. There is a famous pair of rival manifestos where Bill Gates wrote a manifesto that software is so precious, it should be kept secret and it should turn into commercial products, and we should build companies out of this and we should make money. And the great man Richard Stallman wrote a rival manifesto saying, no, this is a completely wrong vision of software. Software should be like mathematics and physics. It should be completely open. And from the mid 70s till today, there has been this competition between two rival views of the world. And there was a time, I think late 80s, early 90s, where it looked like Microsoft was winning. And there was a time where I seem to think 90% of all the profit of all the computer companies was being made by Microsoft. And Microsoft had infinite money going back to research. And potentially just that sheer brute resourcing could have given them a next revolution in terms of ideas. But it is so interesting that in fact, they never developed any new idea. And in fact, the hackers and the geeks and the dreamers of the Unix world ended up winning. And again, when there was a competitive dynamics, it was TCP/IP and the internet and Unix that won. So I think that they say something for that culture of openness, the culture of sharing. What today has a fancy name, the open source culture. Everybody reads, everybody becomes stronger, we build on each other's shoulders, and there is infinite competition between many open source products. So the bar to compete in open source is actually very low. Like imagine if your product is secret, my product is secret. You're a company, I'm a company. Now for me, I have to spend a lot of money to get to a minimum viable product. Okay. Whereas if your code is with me, then it's a very low bar for me to take your code, change something trivial and release my own product. So actually, there is a mushrooming of rival products. Many people in the business world will whine that, oh, there are so many Unix variants. Yes, there are. That's a good thing. It's a feature, not a bug, because that is the sound of competitive dynamics where many ideas are being expressed. Nothing prevents you from picking up any of the existing open source software and having a different point of view and saying, no, you know what, I'm going to do this differently. Here, this is my idea. And you put it forth to the world. And if it works, it takes off. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So there is a even greater competitive dynamics in this peculiar commune-like environment where we're working in a tradition of science and open culture rather than the traditions of closed corporate IP. So unaccustomed as I am to questioning some of the fundamentals of how modern capitalism works, I think that there is a public goods argument here that once source code is sitting on a website, how it got there is an interesting story. We'll come to that. There are some market failures leading up to that. But once source code is put up on a website for download, it does fit the tests of a public good. It's non-rival because my downloading the code in no way diminishes the amount of code available yet for you to download. And it's non-excludable because you can't exclude anybody. I mean, well, you can artificially put a lock and say people from Taiwan are not allowed to download this code. But really, I mean, there is no meaningful reason for any excludability in this edifice. So we've talked earlier about abuse of the word digital public goods. I think Unix and the internet are digital public goods. There's no government in the picture. There is public funding. The United States Department of Defense funded TCP/IP. Okay, and all in all, mothership of AT&T funded the early development of Unix by paying those salaries. But the creations went out and they became the true digital public goods. There's no government in the picture. There is no coercion in the picture. Nobody forced anybody. Okay, that is a digital public good. And I just want to say in passing for all the Indian nationalists that nobody called it America Stack. They just called it Unix and the internet. And that's how these ideas work. Don't mix it up with nationalism. It will be used all over the world. It will be adopted all over the world. Linus Torvalds is from Finland. Okay, and so on. You don't need to bring nationalism into it.
This is such an inspiring story at multiple levels. And one of them, of course, is that, both of us are great believers in things happening bottom up rather than top down. And that, the exact example that you give, Microsoft spending those billions in R&D, but nothing much really coming out of there. But the open source world just creating so much is miraculous. And I think as both of them as part of markets, like I think of markets as a mechanism for voluntary action through which you and I can work together in different ways. One way to organize that is through a company with IP, with contracts. Another way is that you and I are just talking freely, sharing ideas. I give you my code, you give me your code. And obviously it's a win for me because your code is worth more. And that's how all this beauty happens. So it's a triumph of freedom. It's a triumph of sort of human beings. And there are so many kind of lessons in this for us to learn.
Okay, continuing on the ideas of the culture, the philosophy, there are two more things that I want to talk about. One is that in this environment of many, many clever people working with underpowered computers with inadequate research budgets, there has been a stubborn frugality about the Unix world. So you will always get more bang for the buck because people have passionately tried to improve the code and improve the algorithms. The people sitting inside corporations tend to be well funded and they tend to have super duper state of the art machines, and also that level of devotion, the sadhana is not there. So it just becomes more inefficient, it becomes badly written code. Whereas hiding inside Unix, there are extremes of nice algorithms where people have spent 50 years sharpening the algorithm, improving it, so that today it becomes a very efficient system. So you can get away with a great deal of underpowered equipment. So all over the world today, as there is a great sound of decluttering, okay, there are old computers being thrown out. A lot of those can be rescued and put to good use because once you install Unix on them, they actually can be quite tight and efficient and perform useful functions and useful roles. So there's a nice simple efficiency that is wired. You can get by with less hardware. Also, if you are a thinker, if you're a developer in the Unix world, you please know that the bar for algorithms is higher. You can't make do with quick and dirty like happens in a lot of more normal settings. Finally, on the themes of individual freedom and self-expression, that is just a part of the people, this world, this culture, the separating equilibrium where certain people gravitated to this kind of thing, certain people joined certain corporations, so I mean, like Bill Gates led a camp and Richard Stallman led a camp, and certain people out of their own sense of values and philosophy went in certain directions. So there was deep inside this engineering, there are an array of decisions that don't do central control. It is very easy for that supervisory system, the operating system, to exert draconian control over individuals. So if computers are the clay, the putty out of which we fashion the modern world, it could easily have become that they are straitjackets and there is control. Okay, so you can surely imagine a WhatsApp uncle who will insist that every time you switch on your phone, you should have to do a UID authentication with an iris scan, because otherwise terrorists will use phones, right? I'm sure you would imagine these kinds of things. But the internet is not designed like that. The internet is deeply wired for free, flexible, anonymous use. There is a great deal of anarchism that is understood and accepted, that this is part of life. That if you and I wish to do a secret conversation, we will encrypt our packets and send it across. And not that there be a claustrophobic system that will control the whole thing so that other people cannot read our communications. So this is a deep philosophy that has been there inside Unix and the internet all along, which has partly helped make the internet successful, and which has partly helped create and uphold a greater space for freedom in this world. Because I could paint you an alternative reality. There can be a very nice novel written that in the Bill Gates versus Richard Stallman debate, actually Bill Gates ends up winning. And then you have a claustrophobic corporation that controls all the computing. And when computers are connected to each other, they are all under the rubric of Microsoft Windows. And then corporations and governments have complete control. So we could have gone down that route.
Or even before Bill Gates, AT&T could have had different incentives and could have chosen to
different set of
commercialize.
incentives. So we take all this for granted today. We take a certain anarchism and a freedom and encryption technology and VPNs and all these concepts for granted. Yes, they have caused problems. Because email is so open, email has spam overlaid on top of it. But it is better to have gone down this route than to have claustrophobic control, where you have to first show your iris scan and only then you're authorized to write emails, and you are charged 4 rupees for each email, which is the way the world would have worked out without Unix.
Again, marvelously inspiring. And we are now, before we cut to our 45-minute sort of screencast where you talk about Unix and what to do with it and all of that, a final question for someone like me, listening to a lot of this for the first time and watching your screencast for the first time and figuring out the power of this amazing language, and not just the power of this amazing language, but what the philosophy can mean for one if one chooses to reprogram oneself through it. My question is, what are the practical things someone like me can do? Let us say I learn programming now, I learn Unix, I have all this power at my fingertips, which Ken Thompson didn't when he started writing that sort of space travel program. What are all the different things a normal person like me can do who doesn't want to start a tech company, doesn't want to do any complicated things?
So it's good and nice to talk about principles and philosophy, and then we have cut to the chase. We have to cut to the chase. We have to show me where is the beef, or show me where is the rasgulla. Okay, so let's now turn around and be completely practical.
What you said was firstly anti-national and secondly unhealthy. No rasgullas, too much sugar. Dada aar pari na hami. Rasgulla China, but the beef is welcome.
Cut to the chase. What does this mean for practical people? What does it mean for all of us who are, navigating a complex world and getting ahead? So a couple of thoughts. The first is that, unless you're using Windows, you're already using Unix. I'm just making you more aware of what your life is and how we got here. And so that, when you touch these objects and these creations, you have that sense in your fingertips of the journey to here, about how we got here. It's just, it's like you're standing in front of a painting, but I'm telling you the backstory. That's the first and simple thing. The second is that there are ways in which we can connect and engage into this world more. You mentioned Bell Labs as being this amazing place where people met each other and talked to each other, and face-to-face meetings is indeed a fabulous thing. But a lot of the work of the modern internet has gone into distance work with occasional video calls, but primarily bulletin boards and mailing lists and such tools of collaboration. So it is incredible and mind-blowing that today the Linux kernel, the world's most complex piece of code, the Linux kernel, is managed by about 10,000 or 20,000 programmers who are spread all over the world, and a couple of them live in India, I'm very proud to say, and coordinated by multiple sub-managers and managers, and at the top Linus Torvalds. But it's all done in the open through a system that is called Git. And Git is a miracle written by Linus Torvalds. It has a user interface that is called GitHub. And this has become an open collaborative system whereby all of us are welcome to go look. So we can just go look at the sausage factory. We can see what is being done by who and how. And then we can start participating and we can start contributing. So there is a low bar. You can contribute a bug report. You can contribute a feature request. Or you can start writing some documentation that you did something and you painfully understood what it actually means, and you feel that there is no good document that expresses it. You can write a document and you can become part of it. And highest of all, you can be writing code and you can become part of this. So I feel that for all of us in India or Bangladesh or Vietnam or every far-flung corner of the world, this is actually miraculously empowering, because it's not that there are some faraway great people in Bell Labs. There are people I can watch, I can stalk them, and I can keep watching what they're doing, and minute by minute I can see the creative process and I can become part of it to the extent that I like. So I feel this is a very nice line of attack that many of us should consider. And I already mentioned the Raspberry Pi. It's a small credit card sized computer with price points from 2,000-3,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees for the card itself, and then you'll have to spend more money putting either a keyboard or a meter to measure the temperature outside, or something that will control the watering of your plants. Okay, but everybody should play with the Raspberry Pi. It's a delight. It's a tiny, small, cheap computer. You boot Linux on it, and you can be tinkering with computers and various cool applications of computers at a very low entry level point. And the whole thing comes to life, and we can be building systems, building code. We can become tinkerers. We can become creators to a greater extent.
What cool things have you done with your Raspberry Pi?
I haven't done any really cool thing yet, but I just wanted to say that for the artistically inclined people like our wonderful Namsita and Vaishnav, the Raspberry Pi is being used to build art installations. So it becomes a program that controls a combination of lights and movement, and that turns into art installation. So that's an example of what can be done using the Raspberry Pi.
And now it's time to go to your demonstration of Unix. So here is that video that you gentle readers have been waiting for, and here we go.
Okay, welcome to Unix. At the simplest, you could just be using a conventional big graphical application. So as an example, I'm going to show you a spreadsheet. Okay, this is a free open source spreadsheet that is called LibreOffice, and yeah, you could use this. And these days, most interesting things happen inside a browser. You could run Chrome, you could run Google Docs, you could run Firefox. So all that is standard material on any Unix machine. So if you're using a Chromebook, or you're using the Mac OS X, or you're using Linux, these kind of foundations are a given. But that's not what makes this special. So I'm just going to ignore the world of big fat graphical applications. Just treat that as a given. What is interesting is to do things on the so-called Unix command line. Okay, so that is what I'm going to show you today. Look at this black screen here. Okay, this thing is called a terminal. We issue commands here. So I'm going to say echo hello. That's a command that says hello. It's making a little bit of noise there because it's saying to me that the LibreOffice, which is that spreadsheet, was closed by me. Okay, I'll do it again. Echo hello, and it says hello. So what has happened? There is a command which is called echo, and it was given an argument which is hello, and in response it produced the word hello. Okay, so I can say echo hello world, and it says hello world. Okay, so that's an example of a command, echo, which takes two arguments, hello world, and it responds by saying hello world. So living in the Unix command line is about using a large number of these kinds of commands and getting a lot of good work done. Okay, so one of those commands is ls. ls is show me the list of the files and directories that you have here. Okay, so let me get into the directory for everything is everything, which is abbreviated EIE. So in my directory system, I start at tilde. This tilde sign means my home directory. Then I have some mess, and then there is a clean part. And in that I do work. And in that I keep a directory called media. And in that I keep a directory called EIE. Okay, so that is where all my stuff is sitting. And you can see some blue things and a white thing, that is the README. Okay, the blue things are themselves directories. So if I say ls inserts, it shows me the contents of the directory that is called inserts. Okay, so I have a directory called catalog, I have a directory called inserts, I have a directory called metrics, and I have a directory called upcoming shows. It is good practice to keep a README just to guide your own future self or to guide a collaborator on what is going on. So if I want to print the contents of README, I say cat README. Okay, I'll explain what is cat in a moment. So this is my README file. This is just my discipline that in the directory called catalog, I track an archive of the material that's been put out. In the directory called inserts, I have some inserts. In the directory called metrics, I track information about usage of the show. And in the directory called upcoming shows, I am developing future shows. In some other operating systems, you may be familiar with the word folders. In Unix, these things are called directories. They were invented here and they've been adopted by other operating systems in the world also. Okay, so in this, I'm showing you my care in how to manage a directory system. So if I say ls, I don't have a random collection of bad file names and bad directory names. Okay, so I will say cd to go into catalog, then I say ls, and there are some good logical file names. There's a file name catalog, and then there are some other things which I'm going to explain in a moment. But the key point is there is thought and care around file names. So choosing good file names and managing a good directory system is a superpower and is an important part of being productive. And I always encourage people that think hard about file names. You will notice I have a file name here called third-party_materials. You can have white space or blanks inside file names, but it turns out to be nicer if you don't do that. So use an underscore. Similarly, you will see me carefully using capital letters and lowercase letters. So normal files have lowercase names. Normal files have lowercase names. Okay, whereas directories have uppercase names, and there are some special files which have uppercase names, and there's a reason for that, but I don't want to go into too much detail. My point right now is to be intentional, that think hard about the kind of file names that you use, because that has a major impact on the legibility and comprehensibility of what you are doing. There is a very big philosophy here around legibility and comprehensibility. We do everything as a battle against the frail human mind, that my mind is weak, my mind is not able to comprehend, my mind will not remember what the hell I was thinking. And I have my own directories and my own files that are 30 and 40 years old. So the only way in which I will be able to handle my own stuff is to take great care on file names and a well-structured directory organization. I just used a command cd, which I did not explain. Cd means change directory. So if I cd upcoming shows, then now I'm inside the directory called upcoming shows. If I say cd ... I go back up to the parent. ... is one upstairs. Oh, and you will see I did not actually type in the entire upcoming shows. What I did was I said up and then I pressed tab. That works, Why? Because if you say ls, you see that the file names are catalog, inserts, metrics, readme, and upcoming shows. So once you have said up, there is only one place to go. And then when you say tab, it gets automatically completed. So if I say ls u tab, then it knows that the rest of it, there can only be one directory, which is upcoming shows. So it expands that automatically. So far, I have just introduced the basics of a directory system and the need for sensible file names and some good conventions. Use uppercase for directory names, use uppercase for some special things like the readme file, and use logical file names everywhere. If I say star, that maps to all the things present here. So if I say ls star, it gives you the contents of all the directories. So at a glance, you're seeing everything going on. Readme is just a file. Then catalog is a directory and it contains a few things. Inserts is a directory and it contains a few things. Metrics is a directory and it contains a few things. Upcoming shows is a directory and it contains a few things. Okay, so at a glance, you're getting the full picture, and you can see my basic hygiene, that I try to keep things clean and I care about what file names I use, what directory structure I use. And that's our beginning. So okay, now we turn to chapter 3. In this, I'm going to introduce some concepts of the way these commands work and a little bit of the tool chain. Okay, so now imagine I say ls and it gives me these things. There is a conceptual thing going on here, which is that the output of ls is set to go into a standard output. So what you're seeing on the screen is the standard output. You can always capture that standard output and put it into a file. So if I say ls greater than a file, what's going to happen is the command ls will run and the output of ls will go into the file a file. Okay, and now let's look at the contents of a file. Okay, and you see the text that came out because of the ls has come into a file. Okay, so that's just a convenient thing through which we can operate, and I'm going to delete the file a file. Now, so far we have taken the output of a program and put it into a file. Now, just for your information, there's a directory called /tmp, which stores things for you that are temporary. And each time you power off and power on your machine, the /tmp file gets emptied. I like to put temporary things there because then I don't need to remember to delete them. So that way we have less junk sitting around. So I'm going to often do examples where I'm going to push things into /tmp. So let's go into my metrics directory and I'll show you some of the commands in operation. So first, let me show you my file shows.csv. Okay, shows.csv is a file where I keep track of the usage of the various shows of Everything is Everything. So here you see an episode number, a shortened name of the show, then what is the length of the show, what were the number of hours that were used in the first 24 hours, what is the total number of hours used, and similarly all the things that are mentioned here. Okay, so there is a command in Unix which is called sort. So I can feed this file to the sort command and I will get a sorted list of the shows by various things that interest me. So let's imagine I'm interested in the length of the show. This is 54 minutes, this is 60 minutes, this is 46 minutes. Okay, so there are 23 shows in this file. I have not updated it lately. And it shows you a widely varying length of each of the shows. There's a command in Unix which is called sort. Okay, now it will grok the file shows.csv. Okay, but somewhere in this we need to think about what do you want to sort on. The first column is numbered 0, the second column is numbered 1, the third column is numbered 2. I want to sort on the column 2. Okay, so this is sort on the second column. Now the columns in this are delimited with this vertical line symbol. This is also called the pipe symbol, and I'm going to explain in a moment why it's called the pipe symbol. So how is Mr. Sort to know what is the structure of this file? So I need to say to him that the file separator of this file is the pipe symbol. Minus T is how I teach sort that the separator of this file is the pipe symbol. Now unfortunately the pipe symbol is special, so I'm going to need to put a backslash on it. You will see why the pipe symbol is special. It has a special meaning on the command line. So when you put a backslash in front of it, you are saying don't worry about its special meaning, just believe me literally. So whatever you put a backslash on gives you a literal interpretation. And by default sort sorts alphabetically, but I want him to sort numerically. So let me remove the junk here just to make this more comprehensible. I'm just cleaning this so that you can see it more clearly. So what's going on here? We have a sort command where we are saying sort numerically in a file where the separator is the pipe symbol, and the backslash is to reassure the Unix command line that I mean the pipe. Use the second column, but you're counting from 0. So 15 is the first column, CR Rao is the second column, and 57.18 is the third, but because we're counting from 0, it's 0, 1, 2. And as an input, I'm feeding the file shows.csv. So when you say this, you get the output of the sort. And Are You Just One version of Yourself was our shortest show at 46 minutes. And Ukraine was the longest show at 91 minutes. The China model broken has 88 minutes, okay, and so on. Now, suppose you don't want to see the full file where there are a large number of lines, and you just want to see, show me the three longest shows by length. Okay, so you can take the output of this shows and put a pipe symbol here and feed it to a next command. So what's going on here? The pipe symbol means take the output of the left hand side of the pipe, which is this sort incantation, and feed it to another command, which is tail -3. What is tail -3? It's a command that says just give me the last 3 lines. So when I fire this command, I just get the last 3 lines, where we are being told that the beauty of finance at 80 minutes and the China model broken at 88 minutes and Ukraine at 91 minutes are the 3 longest shows. Now this is an example of the Unix command line and the toolkit in action. There are many commands. You will need to pick up about 20-30 of them, and then they can be put together in all kinds of ways. And here I've showed you one example where there is a command called sort, there's a command called tail, and they are strung together using the pipe symbol, and that's how we get our work done, that we are able to combine these things. Also, please note, my files are plain text files. I'm not going to store data in some obscure file format, because plain text files are the universal language by which all the programs speak to each other and are able to read files, modify files. Plain text files are a good thing. So you don't store things in specialized file formats that are custom to one program at a time. Rather, we use the lingua franca, which is simple plain text files. Okay, now I go to the next chapter where I'm going to show you some of the productivity tools around how we stay organized in the management of everything is everything. So Amit Varma has already mentioned on the show that we use Roam Research. So Roam Research is just a normal fat application. Note, I did not type in Roam Research. I said ROA and I said tab, at which point the name Roam Research got expanded, because there are no other executable commands that are called Roam that start with ROA. Okay, and I'm going to say ampersand. Ampersand means fire this off in the background and give the command back to me. Okay, and that gives me the screen of Roam Research. So Roam Research is a fat application. Here I'm running the Linux version of Roam Research, where there is a shared directory, everything is everything, where I'm collaborating with Amit Varma. This is the main directory of everything is everything. Okay, so for example, here is vaccines, and I think this was show number 27. This is our notes to self on how, on the story we were going to tell around the vaccines show. We didn't get to talk about advance purchase agreements. We didn't get to talk about the miracle of the COVID vaccine, okay, and so on. So this is Roam Research, and it's a conventional fat application running in a graphical system. It works on an internet scale, and it permits collaboration. Now, I also mentioned that Emacs is an editor which has a similar capability in some respects, which is called org mode. Let me go through this step by step. Emacs is an editor which allows us to edit files. Okay, I have a file which is futureepisodes.org. This is a file that I am managing where I keep track of my own ideas for future episodes. I don't use Roam Research so much myself. So it's a collaboration tool. It works with Amit, and it's quite easy to cut and paste across the two. But my fingers invisibly type Emacs, so I prefer to maintain things as an Emacs file. Okay, so here's Emacs. Let me make the font a little bigger because this is going into a video recording. Okay, so the way this works is that this is a plain text file, and it supports a hierarchical nesting of subjects which will collapse as a tree. So if I say tab, it gets hidden, and if I say tab once again, it gets expanded. Okay, so let me show you. These are my ideas for future episodes, and just as notes to self, I'm keeping track of how complete they are. So I think that there's going to be an episode on market power where I'm going to work with Megha. I think that there's some interesting stuff. Mark Andreessen and Vitalik have written about techno-optimism, so there's potentially an episode there. Perun has built an India video, there is an episode there, and so on. But note my use of the tab, that if I punch on the tab key, then this opens up, but if I punch on the tab key again, it goes away. So I get to see a high level outline that these are all the show ideas that I have in mind. And if I press tab again, the detail is hidden. So if I press tab at the star level, all the highly feasible get hidden. I have nothing under vague ideas. I have a bunch of recommendations in mind. Under movies that I want to see, there are some that have been used, and there are some things for the future. Okay, so there is a range of these things that are being stored here, and this is a feature inside Emacs which allows me to do this hierarchical organization of a file. Okay, and I'm exiting Emacs now. So you could see there is a similar functionality in Roam Research. There is a similar functionality in future episodes. Suppose, but please note, Roam Research is storing a file on the cloud, and it does not allow me access to the file in any way other than the data that is stored on the cloud. Or I can manually go into Roam Research and export the data and so on. Whereas here, it's sitting here as a file in front of my eyes. It's a simple plain text file. Okay. So let's manipulate that plain text file. Remember I said every time there is a star, that's an idea for an episode. So for example, I can use a command called grep, which will pull out star at the start of a sentence from future episodes. And there I get an X-ray of the file, that I have all these ideas sitting around inside the file, and I could potentially feed them to a command that will count the lines. This is strictly not correct because there's also these things used and future which are not actually episode ideas. But this is a demo of taking a command grep which will hunt for a string inside a plain text file and feeding the output through a pipe into a command called wc, which is a word counter. Okay, so far I've introduced a command sort, I've introduced a command grep, which is to hunt for a string in a file. I've introduced a command wc, which is to count the words, wc for word count. I've introduced a command tail, which is to take the last X lines from a file or from an input stream. So there are many such commands and we are able to string them together. Now I want to show you chapter 5, which is about some amount of automation. So imagine I'm sitting here and I'm doing futureepisodes.org. And for whatever reason, I want to be able to convert this to a Microsoft Word format. And much as I live in a Unix environment, many people external to me like to use Microsoft Windows. And so there is occasion for needing to convert this file into a Microsoft Word docx file. There's a nice Swiss Army knife that is called pandoc. Pandoc is a every to every file format converter. So I can say pandoc futureepisodes.org and I say put the output into a.docx. Okay, and he will helpfully convert this into a Microsoft docx file. And now I'm using the command ls and it shows me that on the 2nd of Jan at 1:19 p.m. I have a 21 kilobyte file. How did I get this detail about a.docx? Because I gave the switches -al to the command ls. If I just said ls a.docx, it will just give me the file name. But I want to know more, so I say ls -al a.docx, and it tells me this is a 20k file. Okay, and I don't want this, and I delete it. Now, imagine this is going to have to be done often, and I really should not be so lazy and call it a file a.docx. I should give it a proper name. So what I can do is I can make a new command, which is convert to doc file. Okay, so I'm going to be in Emacs here, and I need this incantation. Don't ask me for the details right now, but by putting this incantation into the text file, it becomes a executable command. So I will say pandoc futureepisodes.org -o futureepisodes.docx. Okay, ls -al futureepisodes.docx. So what have I done? I'm going to save this and exit. So let's look at what I've done. I've created a new command, convert to doc file. It contains these commands that there is an incantation at the beginning that is required to make this an executable file. And first I'm doing a step, which is the command pandoc, to convert it into a doc file. And then I'm doing a second step, which is I want to look at it, at what is the file that was created. When you write such a text file, you have created a new command. You need to do one incantation once, and after that we are done. So now I'm able to run this as an incantation. So it converted to the doc file, and then it shows me the output. I would like this to say a little more. So let's go back inside, and I want it to say converting the current .org file into a .docx file. Okay, so this is babble a little more, tell me what's going on. So now when I fire the command, it says I'm converting the current .org file into a docx file, and then it does the conversion and it shows me the fruit of this labor. Okay, so now I've created a brand new command, convert to doc file. So this is the Unix philosophy, that we keep doing automation of our own work. That I think a little that I'm going to store an org file, but because Amit Varma does not use Emacs, when I give it to him, it would be nice if it's a Microsoft Word file. There are ready command line incantations through which the conversion can be done. And then I'll automate that by making this little specialized command, which is called convert to doc file. Okay, and in this vein, there is another nice automation tool that is called mic. I'm not going to demo that here in more detail, but just FYI, at some point go look up something that is called mic. In chapter 6, I'm going to talk about a little tool that is called awk. Awk stands for AWK. Okay, awk is a tool, and I'm showing you the spelling there, where it is a system of our supplying a pattern and an action. So imagine you have a text file and there are patterns and there are actions. So I specify the pattern and then I specify the action, and I can have many patterns and many actions. And awk will run through all the lines of the file and it will try to apply all the patterns and it will do all the actions. So let me show you this in action. Let's go to the metrics directory. You saw the shows directory, the shows file. Okay, and you remember earlier I had showed you an example of using sort to process the shows. Now I'm going to show you a demo where we will do similar things, but I'm going to bring awk into the picture just to give you a hang of what is going on. I'm going to say awk print $3 shows.csv. Awk counts from 1. So this is column 1 is 21, column 2 is beauty finance, and column 3 is the show length. Okay, but here again, just like in the case of sort, I need to tell him that it's a pipe delimited file, and he prints out all the column 3s. Now what's going on here? The brace contains the action. So what is presented inside braces is what is the action. What is the action? The action is print the third column. In the first line, so let's look at the shows file. In the first line, I have kept the names of the columns. Okay, so when I do the awk operation for the first line, it also gives me the column name length. What if I don't want that? What if I just want the numbers? So I'm going to make this awk program more complicated by putting a pattern. Okay, so in simple brackets, we present a pattern, and in braces, we present the action. What is the pattern I want here? I want it to apply for all row numbers which are more than 1. So NR is an incantation that says the row number and greater than 1. So don't do this for row 1, but do it for all the others. Row 1, you remember, shows length, and I don't want that. Okay, so here I've got a clean output where it ignores the first row. For all the other rows, it has printed out the show length, and I could take this output and pipe it to sort minus n. So take the output of this awk and feed it into this pipe. The pipe connects it up to sort, and I just want a numeric sort, and I get a sorted list of all the show lengths. Okay, and once again we see that the 80 minutes, 88 minutes, 91 minutes are the longest shows. 46 minutes, 49 minutes, 53 minutes are the shortest shows. I could take this and feed it to tail minus 3, and it gives me the 3 longest show lengths. The opposite of tail, of course, is head, and I get the shortest 3 shows. That is done using awk and sort and head. So you see I've combined 3 tools together. That the awk was used to extract the third column. So the awk was told that this is a file where the pipe is used as the file separator. Then find me the pattern where the row number is more than 1. For every row where the pattern is the row number exceeds 1, perform this action, print the third column, apply this program to shows.csv, take its output and feed it to sort minus n, take this output and feed it to head minus 3. Okay, so this entire complex operation has been done in one line. It's succinct, it's clear, it's fast, and you get your work done right there sitting on the command line it's a very powerful way to manipulate files. This is a small trivial file, but you could be doing giant data sets, millions of records being processed like this. Let me show you another simple example. Here's a file of the monthly time series of the usage of the show. So in this, we have the month and the number of hours for which the show was used and the number of unique viewers. Okay, so in June, we started out as 300 hours being sent out to 1947 unique viewers. And in October and November, we are at 10 or 11,000 hours being shipped out to some 14,000 unique viewers. Now, I want to know what is the minutes of use per unique viewer. Okay, so I can do this in awk. I will once again apply the pattern nr greater than 1, because in the first line I have stored the column name and I don't want to do arithmetic operations with that. And then I want the action where I say print the first column and take the second column, which is measured in hours, multiplied by 60 to convert into minutes, and divide by number 3. That's the number of unique viewers. Okay. Apply this to monthly TS. So there you go. Right on the command line, we find that in June, the average user of this show was at 9 minutes. Okay, so there were 2,000 odd people who showed up, but most of them were just curious spectators and there was really no usage of the show. Over the months, the show has developed a higher and higher loyal base where there are people who know the show who are coming back. So I think the early asymmetric information has receded and there are people who like this who are coming back. And in the month of November, the average viewer was at 44 minutes, and there are 14,000 such persons standing in the month of November. And so this minutes per unique viewer has risen through these first 6 months of the show from 9 minutes to 45 minutes. Now note what has started happening in this little conversation. If you are with me so far, and if you see that when faced with a file monthly ts.csv, that's a monthly time series of the month and the number of hours used of the show and the number of unique viewers, where the file says that in June 2023, there were 301 hours by 1947 unique viewers. We are able to tell awk that process a file where there is a file separator colon, because there's a colon here, and focus on a pattern that the row number should exceed 1. That's in simple brackets. Everything in simple brackets is a pattern. And perform the following action. Everything in brace is an action. Perform the following action. What's the action? Print the first column. That's date. That's the month number. Then print the second column multiplied by 60 to convert into minutes and divided by the third column. That's the number of unique viewers. And apply this on the file monthly ts.csv. And we've got this done. At this point, are you just doing something clever and effective on the command line? Or have you, gentle reader, become a computer programmer? Okay, and the answer is both. And that's a part of the Unix philosophy, that generally we blur the lines between non-programmers and programmers. That if you're doing this, you're already a programmer. And within 10-15 minutes, I have got you to start writing something that is actually the code of a computer programming language. And the point is, I did it without being very heavy about it. I did not take you through hours of instruction. I just got you going in a simple and intuitive way. And this is part of how the Unix world works, that programming is for everybody. It is assumed that everybody will find it useful to do little bits of programming. Programming is not intimidating. It's made very easy. You get to putting these tools together and you get a lot done. Let me show you a little bit about what I'm doing in the catalog to give you a flavor of how these things work. Okay. What is catalog? I have a file called catalog where I just keep a catalog of all the things that have happened in Everything is Everything. Okay, so this is a simple text file. So for example, for episode 24, I have a file where I keep this clear file structure and pattern, where there are two spaces here and I have the title of the episode. There are two spaces here and I have the date of the episode. There are two spaces here and there is the URL of the episode, okay, and so on. And then I store all the chapters. This is just my personal convenience that I keep this plain text file for myself because I like to be orderly, so I can hunt down things in this file. Maybe I want to look it up. Maybe I want to put it somewhere else. Maybe I want to cite this somewhere. Okay, so this is a catalog file. Now, sometimes I am required to make a summary catalog as an HTML file, which is just the episode name and a URL to use that episode directly. For that objective, I wrote a simple awk program. Okay, I'm not going to explain this here, but here's an awk program where there is a pattern called begin, which is run only once at the beginning. It's a pattern that is true only at the first time of the program. Then this is a pattern that looks for the words ep. Okay, so you see ep24. This is matched by this pattern, and the action is here. Then there are some pattern action, and then there is an end. There is a pattern that is run at the end. I'm not going to explain this awk program to you in great detail. Right now, I just want to say to you that this is an awk program which has a total of 16 lines. Okay, so it's not complicated to write once you know some awk. And I admit I have got your hands wet with knowing a little bit of awk, but you don't yet know awk enough to understand this, and that's okay. But I just want to say to you that it's a small 16-line awk program that I wrote. What have I called it? The program is called mktoc. What is that? It's make the table of contents out of the catalog. So let's run it. I'm running the program mktoc on the data file catalog. And what this does is it generates an HTML file for me. What is this HTML file? Let's play this HTML file. Because we like to live on the Unix command line, I can put it in a graphical browser, but I like to do everything in text mode on the command line. Lynx is a web browser that works on the command line. Okay, and you see the HTML file that has been created. It has all the shows with the date, and each of these things in blue is a URL that you can click on. So this is a brief catalog of everything that's been done in the show so far. So you see what has happened here. I was maintaining a catalog file, which is just a convenient, handy file for me where I have certain protocols and conventions whereby I'm systematic in how I keep track of the catalog. I wrote an awk program, mktoc.awk, and this I have put into this I can run using the command mktoc.awk applied to the data file catalog, and that generates me an HTML file. Okay, so I am at the end of this little bit of an introduction to the Unix command line. I hope to have given you a flavor that we use the command line, we take it seriously, we organize ourselves, keeping files and directories nicely. Things are kept as plain text files, and there is a lovely tool chain around this whereby we can be very effective and very productive.
So Ajay, I've already given a couple of mid-episode recommendations, and I won't give any more here. But what are your recommendations on this
I have
subject?
3 recommendations on this. One is there is a book by Neil Stephenson, which is called In the Beginning Was the Command Line. Neil Stephenson is the great novelist, and I feel he gets this world deeply, and he has tried to tell the story in a very instinctive and passionate way. So it's not an engineering book, but he gets the dream, he gets the philosophy, and it's a good book to read. The second is an essay by Eric Raymond, which is called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. The cathedral is a model where some great people sit together in one building and build something. And the bazaar is the teeming, screaming world where thousands of people get together and argue about things and disagree. And out of that comes something beautiful. And Eric Raymond, I feel, was the first person to understand the meta sociology about why Unix works so well. It's an unreasonably successful strategy. It's like you're not paying people, but they're building the world's best software. What is going on? Okay, so Eric Raymond was the first person who started understanding what is going on. And the third book is Brian Kernighan 2020 book, which is a brief history of the early years of Unix and Bell Labs.